Well, welcome, sales associates, sales professionals looking to advance to the level of sales associate, and indeed just covering off that you are either looking to break into the market, break in with your career, or reinvigorate a market. So some of you might have even been through the bits where you've actually made a good start with your career and are just wondering how to create or move into a space where you can take permanent and deliberate market share of a particular market. Of course, I do recommend as often as you possibly can to go back on previous webinars in and around this. You'll certainly find something, but the series is going to be a continuous move forward. So we are keeping the subject matter relatively locked in, if you like, around a whole raft of things, really. But you know, this is where we're up to now. I'd say this is, goodness me, this would be session number 17 in the series. This is obviously around foothold as we talk about breaking in. Those of you that are interested in advancing further, that have got lots of listings and you're working off those, we don't put too much emphasis on it, although we do allude to it. That is more the traction stage, and you should be tuning in to List and Sell online. So that runs tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time here in Australia. Just a quick mention, because we've had a bit of a lag between the two. So over there in New Zealand, you guys are already in daylight savings. So there's a 3-hour lag for some of you right now. So I'm guessing that those that have actually found their way on, I'm guessing it's about 3 p.m. in the afternoon. So a little bit different for you guys over there, but I believe our times will line up again relatively soon. So what I want to talk about is, and we're seeing some enormous success on here, and welcome to some of our real estate rock star sales associates that are working with some of our peak performance professionals. So Hannah Saparovich, welcome aboard. And it's great to see that you're doing a great job on the back of working with Nick Saparovich. And sometimes when you're actually working for these guys, it's hard because they're not necessarily great managers, albeit that they're not fantastic salespeople. And I always say the job that you've got is in some ways a little bit more difficult, because you've got to keep them in around those listing presentations. Boy, have a look at this this growth. I'm hoping that this is the last week, so we're getting to the point of breaking free of lockdown, and that is really a point that I want to make right now in and around presentations. For some of you that have been in areas where lockdown has been prevalent, you might be feeling the frustration of, you know, the restrictions and pretty much not so much even how they've affected you, because we know that we can get around these, and if you're given the opportunity, you can do your absolute best to make it work. I know that now Stuart Hatfield, who's, I'm not sure he's on here today. It's hard to look when looking through all the names, but Stuart, who services or works with Ange Soralis down there, they've knocked out a couple of sales, and you know, as the restrictions ease, so they had a good, what was it now, 4 weeks or 5 weeks. Some of you would know better than I do. I know that Jaden, you're on here. You could probably even free me up on that, but I'm not sure whether Geelong suffered the same fate. But of course, you know, a lot of these restrictions have made it so that you can't, you know, get buyers through. But despite that, we've had enormous success. And as the lockdown clears, and I say this again, not reservedly, I say this emphatically, it's very important that you understand it. It's never too late to make a start. But as the restrictions start to lift, and we're in day 100 up here in New South Wales, so it's been 100 days of all of the constraints that are in play. And yeah, we've been managing to get around it because some of the restrictions have not been nearly as draconian. But nonetheless, it also affects a lot of the owners as well. So some of those owners have just been, and it's not that they don't want to offer the opportunity It's not that they aren't keen to make the move. It's just that with all the restrictions going on, some of them are just kind of pulling back. I know that there's one seller that's actually talking to one of our agents down in the Bay of Plenty, and this seller's saying that, yeah, ready to go. There are a few issues that sit around, sales commission and marketing and that sort of stuff, but we're getting by on those. But one of the reasons that the seller's reluctant to put it right back on now is because they're saying the restrictions in the Auckland area are such that they can't see the buyers getting down, and that seller wants to wait until the restrictions are lifted in Auckland because they believe the buyer that comes from there is more likely to pay a premium figure. So how do you handle all this in and around restrictions? Well, just as a reiteration of what we talked about last week, you don't. And I've got to tell you this, I'm now, last week I was kind of suggesting it as I understood the feel that was coming from it. But I know that the simplest way to move into a space where sellers are going to feel comfortable with you as a prospecting agent, even if you're prospecting for yourself, and then ultimately with you as a real estate agent, is if you just park your ambition around getting to the presentation and instead make your conversation far more centric to the seller's motivation. So last week we spent a lot of time talking about that motivation. I just want to reiterate it at the sound of it being a little bit ad nauseum and follow on, because last week we were talking about making the connection. And now I want to talk about your active property seller list, your APS list. And that's what this is about, your focus on igniting the motive with your active property sellers. So if you sat down, the first thing I want you to focus on doing is making that list. Now that list ostensibly is fueled by your prospecting, and your primary consideration, those of you that are working in a real estate agency, is to focus, and we've talked about this many times before, on the incoming seller inquiry. In particular, seller inquiry that, number one, is centric to a listing that you've had previously in a particular area, one which you're coveting breaking into that market or gaining market share. Now, if you're clever, especially if you're in a larger agency, real estate agents, generally speaking, have a propensity to focus on just moving inquiry through, and they get it early on and they kind of discard it. What do I mean by that? Well, I talk about, agents that maybe have their mobile telephone number on a signboard, or maybe have their mobile telephone number advertised on, whether it be online, whether it be on an advertisement, whether it be on an open for inspection invitation, whether it even be on a brochure or one that you've delivered out there, like LA Woman is ours, but a lot of your competitors probably put out a brochure which they call the just listed. They make the mistake with the just listed brochure of, first and foremost, putting a for sale, an image of the property there, and actually putting its address and then erecting the for sale sign. Now, if you put this out, you're not really spreading the news with an agent. All you're really doing is stating the obvious, that what they've already seen. Now, if you look at it from the perspective of the seller, when a signboard goes up, if I'm a seller researching the market and a signboard goes up, do you think I sit there and say to myself, I'll wait for the agent to send out to me a just listed, and then I'll contact them formally and ask what that property is on the market for? Or do you think I scurry and try to find out what that property is on the market for? Of course I do. So I jump in and I'll jump online and try and get that information, or I might telephone the real estate agency. I'll pose as a buyer, get that information, and then I'll shut up shop. So this is what you have to be mindful of. What I'm trying to say to you is look at everything in the market in making the connection. And the real trick now is once we've been through these first, as I spoke a couple of weeks ago, focus on your orientation. And I'll go through that in just a second, that your orientation has to be centric, to understanding the seller's motive. So what you do is when you are prospecting them through, doesn't matter which one they go through. So I said again, go back to the sales inquiry. And if you're looking at sales inquiry that's at least 4 weeks old, this typically has given that seller an opportunity to do some preliminary research. Now, if you go back into that inquiry log, and basically all you do is when you're ringing them through, I just say, hi, John, is it? Hi, John. This is Mark Dwyer from Know Your Real Estate Agent. You had an inquiry on a property. Goodness me, it was back in June of this year or July of this year. Have you purchased as yet? You let them speak. The moment they stop speaking, I say, do you have something to sell? So this is what I call the qualification payment. I'm just trying to qualify, are they just a buyer or are they a buyer and a seller? Or in some cases, they might just be a seller because maybe they've already found something. And because I've left it for 4 weeks and they've had that opportunity to research the market, if you go back on a previous recording here, we talk about the SEL and what we say with sales inquiry being the big three is that once the seller has been able to satisfy themselves that the value of their property is greater than or equal to the amount of money they're going to need to satisfy the motive, they will become receptive to any form of prospecting. But of course, if you ask this question, say, do you have something to sell? They might say, if they're not quite ready, well, we would put our property on the market, but we can't seem to find something to buy. Doesn't matter how that is looked at. What I do know is I've just identified someone who is, it's an incumbent seller who is going to be selling. Now, they may not be doing it immediately, and it might be contingent on them finding something. And I know that for a lot of us, invokes the feelings of frustration, and this is going to take some time. Don't think like that. What I do instead is say, I've got a live one. I've been able to identify them. Now I move. So that's the qualification. I've now identified that they're selling. I now need to, I move to clarifying the motive. So I say, where are you coming from? Now they might turn around and say, we're coming from this area, that area. And I just basically then say, so particularly if the property they've inquired on or attended at an open for inspection or whatever it might be, is within the same suburb. So then I'll say, so was this property one that you were looking at to compare it to your own, or were you looking to move into the same area? So now I'm saying, where are you coming from? Where are you going to? And if they say the same area, so I take it you're looking for a property in whatever suburb it might be. But if they say, no, I was comparing it to mine, I say, okay, so you're looking at moving from there. Where are you looking at moving to? And then once I hear where they're moving to, for me, the conversation can blossom around their motive. It needs to be a motive-centric conversation. And whilst I'm having this conversation, I'm not panicking. I'm not getting all jerky. I'm not looking at, oh, how do I get down there to run a listing presentation? How do I get my guy down there? If you're working with another salesperson, how do I get down there? Because this will degenerate, and you'll probably say something quite stupid like, would you like me to come down and give you an idea on price? Now, I've made this conversation over and over again. I think you're taking a huge risk if you ask that anyway, because, and they might be ready and you might get away with it. I'm not saying you're always going to be wrong, but if they've already said to me they need to find something first, for you to focus on price, it's a very small part of the equation. You see, because sellers, it's the wrong assumption, but the sellers assume that the price they're going to get is going to be gleaned by all agents. And they also assume, given the state of the market at the moment, given that agents are attacking them every other day, that their property will sell relatively easy. And look, properties do sell relatively easy. The jury is always out as to whether they could have gotten more money or the price that they sell for has been maximized. But at this stage, you just got to let them have their head. So what I'm doing is I'm talking more around the motive and what the motive does. The discussion around the motive demonstrates, and if you're taking notes, please write this down. It's the most important thing that you can do as a real estate agent. It demonstrates a 4-letter word that pretty much sums up professionalism to the nth degree. And that word is it shows that you care. Care is synonymous with professionalism. I know that I've said this to you before, but I just want to reiterate this because if you can demonstrate care, this is building a relationship. It is still quite professional, but it's on the premise that they see that your disposition is not one where you just want something from them. You do eventually, and you do want that opportunity, but you are more concerned with their well-being, and this will resonate. So quite often, those opportunities to extend the conversation around that premise is enhanced because you've made that move to talk to them very succinctly about where they're moving to. This is, and I've got to tell you, because here's the problem. If you focus on a market appraisal, and please, guys, get this out of your head. If somebody genuinely wants a market appraisal, even if that market appraisal is associated with potentially a listing at a later date, you're asking for trouble because you become a number. And if you become a number, that number's rigid. And early on, if that number is not in the ballpark of what they're looking at, you can actually be discounted because they lock you in at a number. Just remember this, real estate salespeople, our job is not to calculate the worth of a property. Our job is to market property. So I say to sellers all the time, it's not my job to calculate the value of your property. It's my job to leverage and enhance the value of your property. And I do that. It's almost like I'm a magician because I'm a great salesperson. All right, so just remembering, and I'll just rehashing on last week, the motive is made up of 3 areas. Just want to make very clear on this. It's made up of 3 or composed of 3 things. What or where are you trying to go or do? We all get that answer, but remembering that's just the superficial answer. What you've got to do, and it's a search, it's not an interrogation, so don't push too hard with them. And I say, why would you want to do that? And I'm looking for them to be very certain about the fact that they want to do it, because the more committed they are to the why of what they're trying to do or where they're trying to go, the more motivated they are. So if they push back and they go, because, and snap at me. But if they also dig a bit deeper, so if it starts off with them saying, we just want a house with bigger rooms, and then they're saying we want the bigger rooms because our kids are getting older now and they need a room to themselves to study. And then they go a minute further and they say, well, when I was a kid, I never had that room. And I always swore to myself, if the opportunity arose, well, that's what I would do with it. Now you're digging down through the layers, but just, again, gently asking why. It's not an interrogation. You need to tell me. No, it's in conversation. And I've said this over and over again. It's the agents that are focused on meaningful conversations during this lockdown, on demonstrating care, that as the restrictions are lifted, they will typically enjoy the lion's share of the business because it will come their way. All right, so then we get down to the last part of that scenario, and that question, the last part of the making up of motive is, when does this have to be done by? So I say to them, when does this have to be done by? Now, if they turn around and they say, well, look, it doesn't really matter, we can wait forever, that's telling me that the motive is pretty relaxed, or they have a contingency plan. So I need to be even softer in my approach and not pushing too hard, because the agents that push too hard around presentation by solicitation, they will be passed over because they're not demonstrating care, and people think you only want what you want out of it, and that's about it. So again, be mindful of this, please. It's imperative that you are mindful of this in and around that conversation. As crazy as it sounds, the less you focus on moving them to a listing presentation, the more likely you are to win those listing presentations. You see, because the moment that client feels that you care, the moment, and I'm going to show you how to keep that communication up. I'm going to show you how, beyond the connection, how to move into an empathetic state where you are connected, not just connected, but understanding how they're thinking and feeling. Then you can position yourself, because what will happen, and this is how a relationship is forged. I'm going to get to this in just a moment. So we're digging down. We say, when does this have to be done by? They then give us the answer. So then we get to, hopefully, the emotional dominant reason. Now, this could take weeks for them to trust the relationship you've forged with them to get to this point. But in any event, practically speaking, this is what you need to do. So putting this into context, when you come away from this presentation, if you want to take serious action around this, you sit down and you write an exhaustive list of those people you have, in the first instance, identified as sellers, potential sellers. And I don't care if they're 3, 4, even 5 or 6 months off. Some of them might have said, well, leave it till early next year. Now, they may not be serious about that. I think a lot of that could be the result of what's happened with COVID, with lockdowns, with restrictions. So it kind of puts it off. Make that exhaustive list. And when you see that list, then I'd like you to start looking at each of the people, and instead of just looking at it superficially, look at that list and say, okay, how much do I know about what these people are trying to do and where they're coming from? And this will be evident. You'll start to see that my conversations have been more geared to what I want, which is a listing presentation, rather than demonstrating care. So if you get all that in order, and then you start to analyze or look at the communication and how you've worked that relationship with them. Now, the good news is that this can be beautifully enhanced by systematic understanding of what you need to do. And I've got to tell you, I know I'm giving you all the lines that go with it. I hope that you genuinely want to help people, because I can tell you now, the major reason that I succeeded as a real estate agent, the major reason I had more than a dozen people that entrusted me with the sale of their property each month, was because they could see that I not only spoke about the motive, I genuinely cared that they were able to achieve what they wanted to do to that end. And that's what made all the difference. Now, once we've moved through and understand how the motive works, now I want to talk to you about building rapport. So we've already, last week we talked about this, and I said, first of all, your orientation has to be right. Then we have to get the connection. And that connection is made through initial building of rapport. So I said, just a reiteration, make sure that in all of your conversations with that seller, that you drive the subject matter around 3 very distinct areas, and you do not let it divert from those 3 areas. Yeah, and you keep the conversation, the entire context of that conversation, centric to this subject matter. The first is the motive. We've already talked about that. So you move, the moment you've identified them, not to price. We want to give them advice, not price. Yeah. And we want to reserve our opinion on price till we get to a listing presentation. And we want to get to that listing presentation by invitation, where they say, come on down, rather than solicitation of us saying, can I come down? You see the difference? So what we're focused on is getting to the point where we're centric to the motive. Now, the next part is to be centric around the property. for you to drive all conversations to where they're up to. Now, I see agents all the time hit the frustration button when they do contact someone who does say that they want to sell, and then that seller says, well, we're still working on some aspect of getting the property prepared for sale. And they freak out. Now, I know that here's what I need you to understand. Please write this down. Motives change, and those motives change almost daily. So you need to question your way through them. Do not panic when someone says, I need more time. In fact, congratulate the people for being astute enough to recognize that value can be added by making sure that the property is thoroughly prepared before you take it to market. Congratulate. Now, you can make mention, but there are some buyers, one which might be perfect for your property, that are at large now. There would be no harm done in us getting them through now, because if we wait for you to do all the other work, they might be gone from the market because they might find something else. But if we get them in now, they may find it and they might be forgiving moving forward. So this doesn't mean we're going to take it to the greater market straight away, but we can exploit the opportunity for you to improve what you could do value-wise by bringing them on. Now, you don't do this on the first encounter. You don't do this by pushing it over. This is conversation matter that can be brought about later on. So again, I'm driving the subject matter in conversation to build rapport, first of all around the motive, then also in and around the property and anything like that. So even if that client tries to drive the conversation onto a different topic, if they say to me, for example, so how are you going? How are you coping with COVID? So I will quickly answer them. I'm not going to be an ignoramus, but I might say, well, yeah, it's been good actually, because I've been managed to do this, and this. Say it very quickly. Anyway, straight back onto the property, or straight back onto the motive. If you could move, where would you move to? What if you were able to do that despite what's going on with COVID? And the third subject matter is the client themselves. So I'm constantly talking about their interests and what, if they talk to me about their interests for moving and it is related to some hobby or something like that, or, some catchment area that sits in and around the schools, I might talk more about that and just allow the conversation to develop. It has to be centric about them. And I also say this is just your perfect gauge for whether or not you're building rapport. The more they're talking and the less I'm talking, the more likely I am to build rapport. Please understand, guys, the most important thing that I can teach you in the world of sales, is you've got two of these and one of those. Use them in the right proportion. The more you listen and the more you open them up. I've always maintained this attitude. I say, then I teach this very much, prior to the listing presentation at the sales professional level. Yep. The more I can get them to open up about themselves, the more likely I am to win the listing. So there's lots of little maxims I put in there. Of course, if they like me, they're going to list with me. And if they want them to like me, I've got to let them talk about themselves. Yeah. So the more they talk about themselves, generally speaking, the more they will like me. And here's the maxim I hang on to. I say, everyone has a good story. The challenge for you as a real estate agent, as you are budding to become a real estate salesperson, or if you already are, is everyone has a good story. My question to you is, can you get that story out of them? So you've got to look to the point, particularly when you're talking about the client themselves and their interests, to where their eyes light up and they start talking freely with interest about the subject matter. So often I've had people say to me, wow, are you interested in that? I said, well, I'm interested to hear it. Yeah, I've always thought about it. And I just let them talk. And I basically, I know this sounds a little bit cheeky, but I move in that space to what I call the LTB YTD phase, where I let them bore me to death with whatever it is. But experience has taught me, having been in the game for nearly 30 years, the more inclined I am to let them open up and speak about themselves, the more chance I have of then winning their favor and them liking me. And once they like me, everything from there pretty much becomes semantics, because the opportunity is well and truly open. So I've done that. Now I just need to move to the pre-sell. But before I do that, and this is the thing I wanted to reiterate about making not just the connection, but now putting them into an empathetic disposition. We already talked about it a couple of weeks ago. So now, having identified them, I want to get out to them my property seller's research guide. Now, if you don't have one, but you do have something that maybe is a pre-listing kit that you typically send, I would send that now. I would shoot that out to them straight away. This then becomes the opening basis of the relationship that you can move forward. Now, if you're in a company that is using the property seller's research guide and open for inspections to qualify sellers, they'll already have it. Or you might actually also have the electronic version that you might just email to them. Similarly, if you've already sent them the electronic version, you now might send them the hard copy version. There's no problem with that, because it just enhances the opportunity for them to actually physically go beyond maybe even just having a flick through or just glancing at it. They might look at it more readily. That's the first thing. Second thing is, immediately put them onto your SMS router. More than ever before, the more evidence that a seller sees of you transacting property in the context of successfully moving people, satisfying their motives, the more likely they are to say, hey, can you come and do that for me? Because that makes a lot of sense. So we need, and I'll get to this in a second, we need to show them not just, text them in real time as sales occur. Don't overdo this. I do this, twice a week, once every 72 hours at an absolute maximum. Again, this is good evidence that they're seeing that properties are being transacted and people are being moved. And people, I don't mean to belittle the situation, but they are a little bit like sheep. They see it happening, they're comfortable doing it. Next thing we're going to do, and this is one that freaks most people out, you're going to check it with your principal. If they have any problem with it, just get them to call me and I'm more than happy to explain it to them. You then move to, I say, providing a CMA before you've even been to the property. So we have a cover letter that's coming to you, especially those that are in our larger offices that are using property market, are using the PSRG and all that sort of stuff. But in that cover letter, you need to explain, this is not me giving you a valuation. This is me just giving you information. It's not a valuation, it's information, so that you're aware of what has sold and what's going on in your immediate vicinity. And what it does is it empowers them to start thinking openly about where their property sits. Now, of course, if they've been doing their research, that's going to come into play as well. So you give them that comparative market analysis. The only thing it's devoid of course, is any opinion from you. And you just free yourself by giving that over. Now, this also then becomes good subject matter that in the context of engagement when you're calling them up. Because what I'm saying was the physical call-ups, you have to be very careful here and tamper the amount. So I reckon more than twice a week for someone who's a few weeks off is too much. I like to make it around a week. Some people will even need less than that. So you've got to be the judge of that. They might only need to hear from you once every 2 weeks. But in terms of the passive contact, I'm going to keep going on with that, sending out the PSRG, sending the texts, then sending them a CMA. The next one is that you then send them your newsletter, or what we call the market roundup. Make sure that that's out in front of them each month. Same day, every day, keep it lean, keep it factual. Then move to sending your accolades. So make sure that they're seeing in a live format your recommendations and testimonials. I've already made myself very clear about this. Try to steer away from rating platforms like Rate My Agent and the stuff that realestate.com are doing, because when you send those recommendations about you, no matter how good they are, you're also piquing their interest for them to see your competition in play. Far better for your competition to be doing that and then seeing you in there. But if you send your recommendations out, I openly say that you should use something like our accolades platform, because that is directly sending stuff to them that only has a comeback to you, and bang, it makes perfect sense. We then send them out the TwoView platform. So inside a property marketer, if you know, or any marketing thing that you might have that's relatively unique. The reason I like TwoView is in and around COVID, it can offer an avenue for marketing a property that doesn't require any investment from a seller. So they could do it in an off-market arrangement, and it can be done independent of the bigger portals. So there's no need for them to actually throw any money at it. But again, if you've got some marketing thing, get that out to them as well. Now, I believe you should also be sending case studies out. Case studies of previous properties where you've sold. Now, I've made a very big point of this with some of our guys that have been selling properties down in Victoria in the middle of those draconian lockdown restrictions. The same over there in New Zealand amidst those lockdown restrictions. And of course, in New South Wales, I've been pushing it, even though the restrictions weren't as draconian, it's still important that they see that we're still able to function and get property sold. And they've got examples of clients saying this, not us, but clients saying, hey, these guys still managed to get me moved despite all of those restrictions were in place. And then last, but by no means least, again, you should send them information specifically about buyers, even giving them the buyer's surname if necessary, and showing them that you do have buyers at the ready, you're still engaging them, you're still communicating with them. So the moment they're ready to take the plunge on, and all of this, if you do this in order, if you're calling them and tampering the amount, not overdoing the verbal communication, if you're absolutely certain to make sure that you continually, you've got this constancy of communication going forward that's non-verbal, but it's still there, it's passive communication, you will move into a space where you are empathizing with these people, the conversation will prevail, and this is the magic word you're looking for. So you're just creating that relationship, you're engaging them, centric around the motive and demonstrating care. The point will come where they will then say to you, this has been fantastic, Mark, what do you think we should do in this situation? Bingo, you are ready to move to that listing presentation, because I can just tell you uncategorically, you've just been invited to participate. So there it is. I hope that you've enjoyed that talk today. Next week, I will talk more succinctly about some other avenues of prospecting that you can pursue. I can tell you now, the restrictions are lifting. It's only a few short weeks before you will see a flood of property to the market. Those agents that have been engaging people the way that I'm talking, they will enjoy the lion's share of the opportunities that are about to be afforded out there. So again, I implore you to subscribe on YouTube to Property Careers. We will send you that link, those of you that are on here today, where you can review all of these and just keep your eyes out for the premieres of each of the playbacks, and you can actually access that library of all those recordings as they come on board. And I also openly invite you to get your colleagues and friends to register for this webinar every week. And of course, they can jump onto YouTube. This is completely free. You're welcome to look at it at any given time. And of course, if you want some help getting your prospecting game in order, or even getting your listing presentation in order, and you want one-on-one coaching, whether it be through our PC3M Property Careers, where we monitor, manage, and mentor you, or Sales Trainer Mentor, where we show you and manage your professionalism, particularly around the listing presentation, or then, of course, Real Estate Rockstar, just get in touch. So you can contact me, Mark with a K at propertycareers.com.au, or you can try Mark at salestrainer.com.au, or you can telephone me direct on +61 410 592 165. Good luck, prospect and prosper. And I look forward to catching you on the next installment of Property Careers Prospector School.